Okay, we're going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Present are council members Frazier, Cost, Bub, Blake, and Marmee. First item on the agenda is an ordinance to provide for the issuance of $850,000 of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying a portion of the city's cost and a portion of the property owner's cost in anticipation of the levy and collections of special assessments for Horns Hill Road sanitary sewer projects and declaring an emergency.
The issuance of this bond anticipation will allow for the beginning of the construction of the project. The $850,000 is the only amount we're borrowing at this point. This will eventually be bonded, and a portion of it will be special assessments. The rest of it will be general obligation.
Very good.
Motion.
Motion by Frazier,
Second.
second by Cost.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
I will abstain for this ordinance, voting on this ordinance.
Any questions and or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying yay.
Yay.
Yay, yes. Those opposed, same sign,
Abstain.
and one abstention. Next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2019 Fire Act grant programs and support of training programs, equipment purchases, funding for personnel, fire prevention, and fire safety programs throughout the city.
Well, this is the all-encompassing federal FEMA Fire Act resolution.
Motion. Second.
A motion by Bub, second by Frazier. Any questions and or discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Frazier.
What's the time frame for this?
Well, it is federal fiscal year 19, and you know the federal fiscal year is October through September. The problem has been continuously in recent years when the appropriation goes through. So I can't tell you when each application is going to come out because it always gets hung up.
And then previous years that we've got funding, how much was that for?
Well, it's varied. Right now, we are working on an application for 5 new firefighters under the 2018 SAFER. So that application is going to be due this month. We're also waiting on an application for AFG equipment that I submitted several months ago. So we
We're
have
just waiting for the yay or nay based on
Yes,
the process.
yes, and you know, keep in mind the fact that the shutdown was over a month. For the people that actually work in those departments, that is a big impact. It may not be for some, but the people that actually do the work, it is. So.
Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $306,798.59.
Yes, there was some wording in the original legislation that the auditor's office didn't like, and they would like to move this to a project accounting PO as opposed to a standard purchase order. So we would need to disappropriate the $306,000 and reappropriate it onto a project accounting. PA01, as a matter of fact, will be the first ones to use this project accounting purchase order for the Station 5, the Sharon Valley Road Fire Station. This is also, I'd like to point out, this is only money that can be used for the construction of fire stations. It's money left over from the downtown fire station purchase order.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Frazier, second by Cost. Questions and or discussion? Now, he mentioned a disappropriation, appropriation, all we have is an appropriation.
For right now, that's all you need.
Okay, just clarify.
Right here.
Okay. So, any other questions and/or discussion? Yes, Mr.
Chairman.
Blake.
Director Baum, can you, this is $306,000 for this project. What's the total cost of the project?
I don't know that yet.
You don't know the total cost? So are you expecting to come back later to council for the remainder?
Correct. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And that'll be a new loan?
Yes. I would assume so. I would need to discuss that with the auditor first to see how he would most prefer to do this.
Any other discussion or questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I don't have any more questions for Director Baum, but I guess I'd like to just, I am going to vote in favor of this, but it does concern me about the staffing levels for the department. My understanding is from hearing from our fire chief, 2 weeks ago, we heard that we have 79 budgeted positions, and then there's prospects of getting 5 SAFER grant positions, which will help. The SAFER grant positions are 3-year temporary positions, but I think at some point we really need to have a discussion about increasing our permanent staff. And I think that's a discussion that we need to have as a community, as a council. And I just stretching the number of current permanent staff members just really concerns me to staff this new building. And so while I'm going to be supportive of doing this, because I know that this has been discussed for some time, I think at some point we really need to have a real discussion about how we're going to properly staff this without having all the additional stress on these employees that will be serving that.
The only comment that I would make to that is I don't think anybody has an idea that they're going to lay off these 5 firefighters when the grant runs out. So you're moving the number from 79 to 84.
Mr. Chairman, if my understanding of the SAFER grants is typically someone retires and then that position is filled by a SAFER grant person. So you're really not increasing additional numbers. You're just, those people are around. When someone retires, then you're filling in that spot.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I guess it's still a temporary position. You're not ultimately increasing the number. Is from my understanding of using the SAFER grants, how we've done that in the past. If someone's hired on, someone retires, and then their position's filled from the retirement or from leaving the city's employment. Additionally, I'm concerned about what equipment is going to go into this new fire station. Where are we going to be pulling from the other stations to equip this new station?
Okay.
And just a comment, I'm going by what the chief said when he gave his presentation 2 weeks ago, that we only have anticipated 2 retirements in the next year, and if we hire 5, then we're increasing at least by 3 if those 2 retirements even come through, correct?
Well, understand on a SAFER, well, first of all, if you increase your staffing to 84, you're not going to lower your staffing back down to 79.
Right.
If you're increasing it to 84, 84 is your new number. Could you? Certainly. You could lower it to 60 if you wanted, but nobody's going to do that either. So if 84 is the new number, 84 is the target number. Now, if it drops to 82 or 83 while you're trying to fill positions, we only can work with what applicants we get. So we fill to a point of 84. Right. If we get 5 SAFERs, 84 is the new number, and that will be the number that we'll fill to.
And we have
we've budgeted right. That. So during the 3 years, if you drop below, and Barb's here, she can explain it. If you drop below 84, you have to get back to 84, or you have to increase the grant by a certain. If it takes you 6 months to get back to 84, you're kicking the grant out 6 months, right, so that you still have that. You've got to match your 84 during that grant time, or I'm sure there's a penalty involved at some point. or it inhibits your ability to get future SAFERs at the very minimum. So 84 becomes the new number. That's all I can say about that. You can either take my word for it or not, but nobody's going to drop off. Nobody's laying anybody off, and nobody through attrition is going to let the number of firefighters drop below 84. Aside from temporarily, because I don't want this to come back and bite me at some point, if we have a couple retirements, we have to get those positions filled again. But they will ultimately work towards 84 once again.
Hold on. Barb, go ahead.
Well, let me tell you right now, with our 2015 SAFER, I had to get an extension, and they allowed it for 6 months. We really need it through September, but somebody higher up on the pecking order has to do the additional blessing for that. But we're short now, one, the level we should be at. But with our new application that Steve talked about, okay, some of the rules have changed a little bit. It's a 3-year grant. There's a cost share with this one, but they will grant no extensions. So if there's an issue with somebody leaving or 2 or 3 of them leaving, and we fall below the staffing level that he mentioned at 84, if we don't get somebody on board, we're going to forfeit down the road part of that SAFER grant because they're cracking down on that.
So with that being said, I guess what I will tell this body is I will urge the fire chief and the mayor to allow for more liberal use of the lateral transfer so that we can pick people up immediately rather than go through a long and exhaustive civil service hiring process.
All right. Okay. Mr. Frazier?
So back to the fire station. What are the next steps in the process since you have this money in the right project fund? What are the next steps? Is it architecture? Is it planning?
Well, we'll have to get a hard bid, come back to this body. I would assume then we would put it out for bid to see if we get any takers. Then once we get a bidder that's approved, and if we get the go-ahead from council, then the first step would be demolition of the current building and then construction. The demolition of the current building is in the property maintenance budget. It's ready to go. And then we would have this $306,000 to begin with.
If I may.
Sure.
Is there a timeline that you're anticipating for this, or is there too many variables?
So I would like to break ground maybe by September and 9 months to a year for construction. But those are loose numbers, you realize.
Absolutely.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
what equipment will be in the new fire station?
That'd be up to the fire chief.
So there's,
I don't tell the fire chief where to put what. I just don't. I realize that sounds like a non-answer, but it's just the truth. He'll put what he wants there. I don't tell the police chief where to put his cruisers either. So it.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Greg. With that, this Finance Committee meeting stands adjourned. Next up is Economic Development.
All right, we're going to call this Economic Development Committee to order. Those present are Frazier, Koss, Lang, Marmee filling in for Rath, Fennell filling in. So the topic that we have is a discussion regarding CRA number 1 and amendments to resolution number 1907, that is amending the resolution 8109 and expanding boundaries of community reinvestment area number 1. So in front of you, you guys will see a packet that includes an amendment that I wrote in order to encompass the requests that have come forward from different members of council as well as myself. And so, barring you going through the entire amendment, I have included some maps at the end. So we can start on the reinvestment area number 1 map that is existing. And also there is the other map at the end, well, second from the end, which is the new expanded boundaries in red of CRA number 1. And so one of the requests that came forward was from the Economic Development Director and Councilman Blake in order to encompass the southern portion of the city. So that is from essentially 2nd Street to the river and on west. And so that's been incorporated in this amendment. The other request has come from Councilman Labutus to make sure that we encompass the 11th Street that has not changed. So when it comes to the southern portion in red that you see, that has not changed. When it comes to the westerly border, that is now at 30th Street in Buckeye Avenue. It does not go all the way down West Main Street. It also encompasses going down Buckeye Avenue, which is similar to what you see in the current CRA number 1, that follows Buckeye Avenue all the way up, and it goes to 21st Street, and then up to North William Street, along West Main Street, and then ultimately it goes up North Williams to West Church Street, and then following the existing border that was proposed by the administration. And so I wanted to make sure that we had this discussion and put everything on the table in this committee to make sure that if there are any other amendments, they are appropriately discussed and we do the due diligence that's required of this body for any adjustments. So are there questions from members of the committee?
I'm not on the committee, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does the language reflect what the maps are? Because the map's not reflecting that. Okay.
So there is not an updated map yet because I'm not that savvy with map technology. But ultimately, we're going to hand this over to the Department of Development. They'll create a new map based along these boundaries. We'll hand the language over to the law director, make sure that it captures what we want it to capture, and then we'll review this in the next committee to make sure that everything's above board. And so ultimately, we're removing a little bit out of the west. We're encompassing some additional part on North William Street, and we're encompassing the south end of Newark as well.
Sure. Yeah, I guess my question, and thank you for all the time you put into this, and Director Motter as well. Just trying to understand, because I think the first question that I'm going to get is, okay, so we're stopping at Main Street, we're stopping at 30th, trying to understand how we arrived at the borders and decided that because somebody's going to look across their street, right, they're going to be eligible for a tax break, and they're not. And so I think just trying to understand, and we don't necessarily have to have that conversation today, we could have it when we have the amendment, but I think it'd be real important to understand the delineation and why we made those choices.
And from my perspective, right, economically distressed areas and areas of commercial development and industrial development. So we tried to make sure that we encompass the railroad tracks on either side to make sure that those industrial and commercial properties are given tax incentives to encourage that redevelopment in that area, as well as economically distressed areas on William Street on east to make sure that those areas that were initially cut off by the highways are given some encouragement for economically redevelopment, as well as the areas essentially from 79 on west that's historically been low income and economically distressed. And so that's been the main focus, is to provide tax incentives for those neighborhoods, and also to make sure that we try to get as close as we can to not have one economically distressed area on the line and the other one being encompassed. So try to make it as fair as possible, and that's where the William Street line kind of came out.
And you said this red map does not reflect that?
That is the previous map.
That is the previous proposal. Okay.
There has
You
to
don't
be an
have the new
updated map based on these changes.
Can I just, Mr. Chair, can I just add, Director Motter and I have been working with the Newark Vision 2020 Neighborhood Revitalization Committee, and their focus of their work has been the south end of Newark. And so after discussions with him, that's why we when this came up before council, then we were like, well, we're already focusing some efforts there, so let's add this as another tool.
And I intended to include that map in the packet, and I'm sorry for missing that attachment.
Oh, that's fine.
I intended to have that map here as well to make sure we saw what all that encompassed. And essentially, the new line is on that Licking River from 2nd Street to encompass that area.
This might be a question for the law director. At some point, is the new CRA development area too big to, I see it, just looking at this map I've got in front of me, it's already significantly larger than our other CRA zones, and I haven't been through the regulations in depth, but I don't know, is there any?
I don't think size of the area is an issue at all.
Just a hypothetical, what would happen if we just said the whole city's in the CRA then?
I think you have to have certain criteria for the type of neighborhood for it to qualify for a CRA.
Okay.
So you can't just draw the whole city, unless of course the whole city meets the qualifications for a CRA, which it does not. So you're restricted to those definitions of what is a distressed area and the particular type of area that's distressed that's subject to these abatements. And then assuming that the property fits that definition, its actual geographic size is theoretically unlimited.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? So we are not going to perform an action today. We're going to call another economic development committee in 2 weeks, where we'll look at the maps, look at the amendment, take an action on that, and put it back into council. So any questions or comments from citizens or the committee before we adjourn? Director Muller.
Thank you. I just want to let the committee know there is still some discussion on whether or not we want to continue west of 30th Street, especially along the railroad tracks down to the Armory. Should that not be a government facility at some point? That's a fair amount of land that's on a very prime site for development along the railroad track, which we are sorely lacking in the city of Newark, and we really would like to keep that on as a potential site. So that potentially, the mayor still has to have conversation about this, probably myself, the mayor, Dave Rhodes, potentially Brian Moorhead. So I don't know if that's totally out of the mix just yet, but we feel that that's a parcel that we definitely don't want to lose sight of that. So I just want to keep that before the committee.
Sorry, one last question. The geographic area, if it's cut off by another CRA, you can't jump, right?
Yeah,
That's
so
the contiguous areas. Right?
So if you look at that green section, which I believe is CRA number 4, there's a little outlet around there. So I had to write the legislation around there along the railroad tracks in order to not directly go 5th Street to cut it out partially. So we wrote the legislation to go around that in cut and all the way down to 2nd Street.
Cool. Thank you.
And when it comes to those conversations, I would love to be a part of them as well. And ultimately, the question is with a state-owned facility from the National Guard, what is the risk of them leaving, as well as where do we really want to draw the boundary in order to meet the criteria of the CRA. So, any other comments or concerns? With that, we'll stand adjourned. We'll go and adjourn until council at 7 p.m. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.